Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Dr. Josie DeVideo. I'm a longtime dentist, a registered yoga teacher, and a certified wellness consultant. Today I'm chatting with Peter Reyes of Ignite Sadhana Yoga in New Jersey. Peter is a registered yoga teacher and a level 1 Wim Hof method instructor. And so, Peter, welcome to the show, first of all.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to have you on because I have a playlist of like breathing videos that I'm teaching the dental community, in order to use mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques to just calm their nervous system and bring them to a, slower, more mindful place. But I also wanted to offer breathing techniques that help energize the body because certainly when we're feeling sluggish or tired, we can use our breath to bring more energy into our system. And I know that one way to do that is through the Wim Hof method. And since you are a level 1 instructor, thank you for being here to teach my audience about this way of breathing. So, first, I want to ask you, what is Wim Hof method? Can you give us like a quick explanation of what that even is for the listeners or viewers who have never heard of this before?
Of course. So on a simple level, it's three pillars, and one of those pillars being breathing and breath work, the second being cold exposure, and the third being mindset, which is kind of tied into the first two. The first two kind of build up to people breaking through barriers that exist in our mind. We all have these limiting beliefs and the conditioning that we experience in the modern world. So going through the process of the breath work and the cold exposure oftentimes brings up, you know, belief systems that we didn't realize exist in us, and then we get to play around with mindset. So that's kind of conversational, but we dive into it through a felt experience through the body. If you want me to go a little deeper, I'd say that it's exploring the depths of your nervous system. So what I what I believe is that in our modern comfortable world, your nervous system never gets to experience the full range of what it's used to experiencing, going deep into the sympathetic, deep into the fight or flight, and then similarly going deep into regenerative states that exist in the parasympathetic nervous system. We've sanitized and made everything nice and safe in our environment, so your nervous system never goes to explore those places. And in those places exists powerful realizations, powerful physiological expressions. So releasing of dopamine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, all these different chemicals that get to release in the body as a result of experiencing something extreme in the nervous system. So we do that in the breathing, we do that in the cold, and in that we get to really, really experience ourselves and get to know who we are on a level that we don't get to do in our comfortable worlds we live in right now.
Awesome, great explanation. So I want to pause for a second because you mentioned, cold immersion basically. And that's something that's become really popular, at least, in the wellness world. Maybe it's just me and I have all these things coming across my virtual desk, but we see it for sure on social media, right? The cold plunging, everybody's buying these special pools and putting ice in them or cold water and plunging into them without any real like understanding of what it's doing. Do you think that the popularity of that comes from the Wim Hof method? Like, why is this a thing all of a sudden?
Yeah, so Wim Hof plays probably the biggest role in that, I'd say. Cold plunging and experiencing the elements and using them as tools to wake up the body have always existed. But I guess this goes a little bit into the Wim Hof method and his history and who he is. He started really, really kind of going on a mission to share this with the world. So he was living his life, everything was fine and dandy, I suppose, until his wife started experiencing mental health issues and after a while committed suicide. And that
Mm.
kind of sent him on his journey. The most difficult times in our life send us on our mission, almost on our hero's journey. So he started really trying to show people, look what your body can do. Look what you can do if you just tap into what exists inside of you. The problem with that is people have been doing this all the time throughout history, gurus, deep meditators and all that. And from our perspective, we always look at them and we say, oh, well, they must be like special. They must be something different than I am, but I can't do that. So his mission was to prove it to science because he knew our Western brains would only accept it if validated. through the scientific method and all that. So he kept on doing crazy things, climbing Everest in his shorts, bringing people up Kilimanjaro who had autoimmune diseases, doing all these stunts. When I first discovered him, he was labeled as a stuntman on Google.
Oh,
Yeah, like a Dutch stuntman. But he finally got them to test his body because he's making all these claims and he's like, okay, I can influence my nervous system or I can influence my immune system, which all of the scientific theory was that no, you can't do that. These are autonomic systems that we don't have control over. So they got him to inject Dead E. coli bacteria into the body, which was a practice they did to test anti-inflammatory drugs.
wow.
So the body has a reaction to it. It believes it's actually E. coli, inflames, lots of stuff happens, and everyone who gets injected will experience flu-like symptoms for like 4 to 6 hours or something like that. So he's like, okay, give me that. And through his breathing and through the cold exposure, no response. He said maybe a mild headache, but that's all. And again, they looked at him and they said, you're the Iceman. You've climbed Everest in your shorts. You've done all this crazy stuff. You're special. And he said, all right, well, give me some people. And they said, okay. And they gave him 2 weeks. And if you know Wim, then this kind of goes along with his personality. After 5 days, he's like, all right, they're ready. Throw them in there. And they injected him with the Dead E. coli bacteria. And even after just 5 days of the training and breath work, they were able to suppress their immune system and influence their nervous system. So that was the big moment that it's like, oh, well, maybe there's some actual scientific backing to this. And since then, it's been this kind of slow growth until it really exploded around COVID time. So I was an instructor before COVID, and we were going to yoga studios and saying, hey, can we do this thing? We teach breathing, and then we bring out a big tub and we put people in ice baths, and people were looking at us sideways. And then around COVID, he had a couple specials. The big one was he was on Gwyneth Paltrow. I remember people were like, "Oh, I saw him on Gwyneth Paltrow's show. Can you guys now come to the studio?" So then it's just really blown up since then because people have really recognized that we need to take care of ourselves since COVID.
Right,
It's become a premium.
right. So you mentioned if you know Wim. So the question is, have you met Wim? And if you have, what is he like in person?
Yeah, I've met Wim a number of times. I've helped him on his retreats. So he has his big retreats in Spain and Poland, and some instructors come out and help him every time. So I've done 3 retreats with him there, and then he was a part of my training way back in 2017. And he's pretty much the way he is in interviews, which is he just looks like a crazy wild man and seems like he's pretty much off his rocker in the best of ways. And I'd say he's like that, but even a bit more himself, a bit more uncensored. One of the stories I've told people to kind of encapsulate Wim is someone sent me a newer documentary about him. And I was like, we're like watching the documentary, we're like, see that shirt he's wearing? He wore that for most of the retreat that I was on with him last time. Like he has like 3 shirts and 5 pairs of shorts, and he's just living in the moment, completely free, and just trying to share the method as much as possible. All the business stuff that Inner Fire does, that's all ran by his kids. He's just trying to bring people across the river to show them the method and wake people up.
Yeah, he's just providing a different modality for people to tend to. Sounds like their bodies and minds and souls, if you will, right? Because it sounds like the Wim Hof method, ultimately, if you follow it in the 3-part sequence, is bringing you closer to maybe the deeper parts of yourself that you're not normally looking at.
Yeah, he believes it can change the world, you know? And so you're like, all right, well, most people look at it as this body hacking, this modality just to keep you healthy or to get you stronger and all that. And that's kind of what you see with the ice bathing on Instagram and stuff like that. People just want to kind of dive in and, do the thing that's a fad.
Right.
But there's something about it when it's taught to you and communicated to you properly and, you're guided through the breathing session in the correct way that I've seen it so many times that it just unlocks something that leads people towards spirituality. They begin to have experiences within the breath work or in deep, intense cold exposure where they really have to drop into their like primal self, their animal body has to come out because in these moments your prefrontal cortex turns off and it's all instinctual. And we don't get that too often. So when you feel your instinctual body, you begin to have this relationship, and really maybe that's what spirituality is understanding the layers of ourselves, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, all being in line with one another, and then outward into the world. And so something about breathing and cold bathing unlocks something to where people just start going down this path of like, okay, maybe I like yoga now, or maybe you know, people start doing psychedelic drugs and really, really exploring themselves. What else is there?
Right. Well, let's focus on the breathing component for this episode because, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, I wanted to offer the audience a technique that they could use to, generate some energy. If you're doing a true Wim Hof method breathing exercise, how long does that typically take? Is there a prescribed amount of time? Like you need to do it 5 minutes, 20 minutes? Help me understand that.
So kind of the prescribed amount of time would be maybe 3 rounds, which
Okay.
three rounds might take you 15 minutes, I might say.
Okay.
But if you only had time, if you had 5 minutes, so for example, Ignite Sadhana, our company has an app where we created ref sessions that are 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because even just one round of breathing or just you can upregulate your nervous system in 60 seconds if need be, if
Right.
you know what you're doing. So I don't like to constrict things to that because then there's always the excuse of, oh, well, I don't have time for that. I don't have 15 minutes. I got a busy life. And so the ego is always trying to get out of those situations, especially because this type of breathing is inducing a stressor on the body. You're pulling the nervous system into a place where it doesn't necessarily want to go. You're
Hmm.
pulling it into the fight or flight.
Right.
So the method goes this way. We're hyperventilating heavily through the mouth. So the mouth is consistent with the sympathetic nervous system. It's like a feedback loop. So we can't access our brain typically. Usually what's affecting where we exist between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic is what your five senses are reading. If something happens, an explosion, whatever, you're not thinking about it. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't have a say in it, but you immediately zip into a sympathetic state, right? And one of the things that starts happening is hyperventilating through the mouth. So the yogis talk about this. And, sometimes as Westerners, we don't completely understand it. It's like, oh, well, the breath can control everything. You can't control the mind, but the mind is the master of the breath. I believe Iyengar said that. And the reason being is because we're accessing that feedback loop on the other side of it through the breath as opposed through your five senses. So we start hyperventilating fast and through the mouth. And sooner or later, your brain gets the signal that we're going into a sympathetic state. And so it works the same way the other way with like yogic breathing, which I'm sure you're
Right.
much more familiar with. We're doing long exhales and maybe inhaling through the nose or playing around with our breath that way. And then your brain gets the signal we're going into a parasympathetic state. Oming, for
Correct.
example.
Right.
We extend our breath, your nervous system relaxes. So we're doing the opposite thing. We're upregulating our nervous system into a really high stress state, essentially. And so they've done brain scans on people doing this breath work, and it's equivalent to someone bungee jumping for the first time. So
Wow.
people begin to kind of tap into a lot of emotions and anxieties or even somatic expression in the body. I've seen lots of different things happening in breath work, maybe screaming, crying, or shaking, or all kinds of things. And it's all the body going through a process. So it's super important and it's part of the process, but we get you nice and high into the sympathetic nervous system, which sounds counterintuitive because we're already typically in a stress state in the modern
Right.
human
Especially
experience.
dentists. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So usually when I'm explaining this part, people are looking at me like, well, that doesn't sound good. Why are we going into a stress state? The higher we go into a stress state, the more elasticity we create in the nervous system and the higher ability we have to go deeper into the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, the relax and digest. So we bounce ourselves really, really high. Then we take one last breath, exhale, exhale to even lungs, and then we hold our breath. And because we've played around with our oxygen and CO2 ratio, we'll be able to hold our breath for an extended period of time. People doing Wim Hof method, oftentimes in workshops that I lead, will start off with like a minute, go up to a minute and a half. We'll go all the way up to 3 minutes most of the times. And people doing the breath work for the first time will be able to do a 3-minute breath hold. And in that process, we've then swung, let's say, rubber banded back into the parasympathetic nervous system. And all those regenerative systems turn on. So when we're hyperventilating, your reproductive system, your digestive system, your immune system, they all turned off. Because in a sympathetic state, we turn off those systems
Right.
because it's the expedient thing to do in the body. I'm dealing with a threat in front of me, right in my environment. So I don't have time for these long form regenerative systems. Something to think about because we're constantly in a stress state in the modern human experience. We're constantly suppressing certain systems in the body. Long term, we're end up with a lot of chronic diseases and things like that. People having trouble getting pregnant, people having trouble with digestion, things of that nature. So when we go into this regenerative state, those systems turn on even higher than they typically would. Not only are we activating those systems, but we created an excess amount of energy when we went into the stress state, for a perceived stressor, but there wasn't a perceived threat. So then we go into a regenerative state and those systems are able to work with that. And so we stay there in a parasympathetic state for about maybe 2 minutes, relaxing the body, letting the body take control. Hopefully, after a couple of rounds, your prefrontal cortex is mostly turned off. And then it's just instinctual. Your body knows what to do. I always tell students that it's like, don't try to control what's happening because you don't know how to heal your body. But the wisdom that exists within you, the knowledge of the body knows exactly where to send this healing. So then you're in deep relaxation for about 2 minutes. And finally, we do a big, deep recovery breath. We go hold and squeeze. And you're a yogi, so this might be familiar. It's more so common in Kundalini yoga that we squeeze the bandhas and try to send energy up to the crown of the head. So from a scientific perspective, in the Wim Hof method, we've opened up our blood vessels by sending the blood out to the extremities and the core, freshly oxygenated from the breath hold process. And then you send it up to the crown of the head. So we're squeezing all this freshly oxygenated blood up to your brainstem. In the brain scans that they've done of people doing this breath work, the brainstem turns on and the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are activated and release natural occurring opioids, cannabinoids, and endogenous DMT. So oftentimes people do that squeeze and they might have an experience. It's the same thing as what the yogis are talking about when squeezing the bandhas and activating your crown or your third eye chakra. These are just using scientific language to describe the exact same thing. So we'll squeeze at the top for about 15 seconds, then release, and then we start again. And then almost each round, the hyperventilation pushes you a little bit deeper into the sympathetic, and the breath hold gets a little bit longer, going deeper into the parasympathetic. And I usually after about 3 or 4 rounds, you lose track completely. Because typically, especially if it's your first time, you want to hold on to the process. You want to understand what's going on with the body. But with so much happening, kind of going through this roller coaster ride through the breath, you typically after a while lose track of the body and going to like kind of an automatic meditative state. And time becomes almost, timeless. Usually at the end, we'll do hour-long breathwork sessions and people wake up and I'll say like, how long do you think that was? And they say 15 minutes because you're so deep into the body and to experiencing what's there and letting your body go through a process. Worried about that. It's like the idea of time and the idea of labeling things or measuring things is a mechanism of control, a mechanism of the thinking mind. And when we let go of that completely, then it becomes irrelevant.
Ask you this, because now I have a few questions. So one, do you do this breathing technique sitting up or laying down, or does it matter?
I recommend lying down. So yeah. To
Yeah,
all
because would it,
to
yeah,
all the listeners, do it lying down. If you're gonna do it sitting up, then like in a chair that if you passed out, you would be safe. Because that's the one thing I tell students about this breath work. Just assume you can pass out at any time.
yeah,
You know, I've seen enthusiasts like go through it and get really excited and then do it standing up. And sometimes you'll be completely fine. And then sometimes you don't know where the chemistry of your body is or how caffeinated you are or whatever. All these kind
right,
of nuanced factors. And then you will pass right out and maybe hit your head on something. People will think, oh, a great time to do it is driving.
yeah,
I've had people say that as well. Um, but you could potentially pass out at any time. And people do in the breathwork sessions, but they don't know. Like you pass out and then you realize you kind of come to and you don't even realize if you passed out or not because you're so deep into just your body taking over that you just keep on going, and there's this whole energy of the room happening, and you just attach to the energy. People are always afraid to pass out, and then at the end of the thing, they're like, "I think I passed out," and
Right.
I think I really liked it. I
Yeah.
think it was a good thing.
Well,
Uh,
that was my second question is do people pass out? Because I could totally see myself passing out.
you wouldn't know, and you wouldn't care.
Yeah.
And I like to tell people that like what we're trying to do is let go. So beforehand, I'm like, all right, I want to tell you everything you need to know about this because I don't want you thinking, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? I like to tell people all the things they might experience during the breath work. Sometimes you get really hot, sometimes you get really cold, sometimes your hearing gets really weird and far away, sometimes you have visuals, sometimes your hands get all tense. You experience tetany because your nerve endings. So you get these like lobster hands.
Mm.
And anything you're gonna feel or experience, I've seen it. Sometimes people shake and convulse even. But I'm like, that's where you want to experience it because not only are we experiencing stuff on a physical level, um, we're diving into our limbic system. So we're diving into the emotional part of our brain. And this is the opportunity for traumas and, past experiences. They just start coming up. Because what happens is we turn off our prefrontal cortex and your limbic system becomes more active. And within your limbic system is where we store emotions. And your body's having an experience too, and your body has movements and experiences that attach to emotions. So I always think a panic attack. Something triggers something in the body, and the body starts going through a process that it
Right.
thinks is the right process to go through to deal with this. So maybe it's freezing up, or maybe it's hyperventilating, whatever it might be, but the body is deepening that habit of dealing with that stressor. And when it happens out in the world, it just kind of happens to you. And
Right.
usually it's not a good ending, pretty much. But when it happens in the breath work, your body's having an experience, the limbic system reacts to that somatic experience. But then the ending is nice. You kind of get to smooth it out and experience your traumas, and things come out like really beautiful things, really things that we're avoiding that we didn't even know exist. You know, people come out on the other side and they're just like, it's the weirdest thing. This is the idea that came up. This is the emotion that came up, or I didn't even know I cared about that anymore.
This is something that people could practice on their own, or would you recommend they have a teacher or someone guiding them and supporting them the first time they practice it because you don't know what's going to happen?
Say the first time, go to a proper workshop or have someone give you proper guidance. Not only does it give you the foundation that you feel like you know what you're doing and you're able to go into it properly, but it's always more powerful in a group. I have people come back to workshops over and over again because the group experience is so much more powerful. Also, I've had people come to workshops and they're like, I've been practicing the breathing for like 2 years now. Like I just wanted to see what it was like to go to a workshop. And then they're like, oh, I wasn't doing it right at all. I
Right.
didn't, yeah. So it's always good to get an expert to lead you through anything, even if you feel like you know everything, even if it seems like a pretty simple method. That's like the double-edged sword of the information superhighway, where you feel
Right.
like we
Right.
don't need anyone because we're like, oh, well, I could just YouTube anything, and it's like, well, yeah, but you might still be missing an element. Same thing with yoga. You can
Right.
get yoga all over the internet, but it's not going to be the same as going to a class. You're
Agreed.
missing some sort of element there. So
Yeah,
do
for sure
both.
you miss that energy of the other people and emotional resonance, if you will. You could feel what other people are going through, and it's just hard to explain, but I agree that being in community, either while practicing yoga or, doing these breathing techniques is always a different experience than doing it on your own or online.
If you extrapolate that out to almost all like experiences, it kind of fits for the most part. I always say like, well, if you went to a concert and like, I don't know, the Rolling Stones were playing there on the stage and it's just you in a stadium, it wouldn't be the same as you and 50,000 people. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like we're social creatures. We're meant to be around each other. I mean, we really realized that, during the lockdowns, how much we want to be around each other and have experiences together and support each other. So
Yes.
I always see it as like a co-creative process that's happening during the breath work, that it's very special because it's these specific people at this time, digging into themselves and simultaneously supporting one another.
How do people utilize this at home?
Yeah, cold shower is one way. And a cold shower at first tends to be harder because it's like a place that you associate with comfort. You know, it's like, oh, my shower, like I'm inviting a stressor into a shower. Um, and if you live in a cold enough environment where the shower's cold, like in the summertime in Philadelphia, it's like, ah, this isn't that hard.
Yeah.
But in the wintertime, then I'm like, yeah, this is the medicine. This is the
Right.
stuff. Um, so I feel like if you're gonna do it at home, you almost have to jump right toward it. You could do cold showers, or if you're doing ice plunges, then you're jumping all the way towards an enthusiast because getting a tub and buying ice every time you want to do an ice bath, it's really not going to work out. Like because it's going to be a deterrent. It's going to cost a lot of money. Like to cool down a tub, you probably need like at least 100 pounds of ice. So that's a whole thing. And again, like the breath work, it's a stressor. So
Hmm.
unless you really like it, which most people don't. I mean, I tell people I take an ice bath every morning and every day I don't want to do it. You
Yeah.
know, one of those things I'm like, ah, okay, I guess I'll do this because this is what I do. Um, so that'll kind of only last so long. So then from there, you're jumping towards getting one of these really expensive cold plunges with like a filter and a cooler and all that for like 7 grand. Or what I do is I just have a chest freezer, like one that you would keep like meat or ice cream in, and
Hmm.
just seal the inside, fill it up with water, and plug it in until it's down to temperature. That would be the cheapest, best way, in my opinion, because that's like what, like $800 or something like that. And then you would just have to change the water every so often.
Yeah.
But I would still recommend getting guided through that part with someone else. But people, you can definitely go through it. Some people do it and they figure it out on their own. My fear is that you'll try it on your own and no one's guiding you through it and you won't be successful. And then you're like, oh, that's not for me. It's not my thing.
Right.
Where it's oftentimes the first ice bath, you need a lot of support. Not everyone. Some people, they get right in and they're able to get right through it. But there's a ton of resistance. It's a real deep stressor. So what happens is your brain immediately says, get the hell out, get the hell out, and also starts telling you stories like this isn't good for you. You're gonna
Right.
die, you're gonna get hypothermia, blah, blah, blah. And so there's a process that happens, and it's your body's gonna adjust to the stressor because it's in us all. Our ancestors spent a lot of time in the cold. This temperature controlled environment thing is a very new thing, let's say,
Yeah.
past 100 years and
Right.
hundreds of thousands of years experiencing the four seasons. So there's a resistance of like about a minute, honestly. Your nervous system spikes, goes up really high, and you immediately start breathing fast in through the mouth. If you keep on breathing fast in through your mouth, you're feeding into that positive feedback loop and you're pushing yourself deeper into the into the sympathetic nervous system, into a stress state, and you'll freak out and run, essentially. So we coach people to induce parasympathetic breathing. You're breathing fast in through the mouth, so you kind of fake it until you make
Right.
and you start slowing the breath. And all you're doing is kind of keeping a drishti, your breath being your focal point, and maybe your eyes on my eyes or, a leaf or whatever. So you're trying to fill up your mind with something else other than the stressor, because then at some point, your primal instincts tap in, your evolutionary capability that exists within you begins to unlock. Your body doesn't want to give it to you because it costs a lot of energy. For your body to deal with the stressor that is the cold, it has to bump its metabolism up to 300%. The intercostal muscles have to turn on and start producing heat and pushing it out to the body. Your brown fat, which we don't use much of, brown fat begins to activate and burn white fat for energy. So it's this whole process. So the body is always saving energy for something that's real, The threat has to be real.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be tapping into our adrenaline-laced states whenever we could. We'd be treating it like a drug, if
Right.
you will. So the brain has to actually believe that the situation it's in is appropriate to drop into an intense state. And that's what deep meditators are able to do. They're able to put themselves deep enough into their mind that they're able to convince this really complex thing that we have on our shoulders that it's in a state that it needs to react this way. So there's chaos around us. Can I bring myself to a state of relaxation and then let my body follow? Can I believe that I'm there? And the ice bath kind of teaches you to find peace in chaos because you're in complete chaos. Can I focus while my body catches up? Usually after about a minute, the breath levels out, the breath begins to modulate itself, and the body begins to relax. And I tell students, I'm like, all right, then at that point, after about a minute or so, your nervous system levels out, your body begins to react to it, and you're still cold. But it's different because it's like you're not letting the stressor dictate how you behave. And
Right.
oftentimes in the world, there's a stressor, and we let it dictate how we behave without thinking. Here, we're creating space between the stressor and our reaction to the stressor. With a calm mind, then we're able to say, oh, well, that's just cold. That's just a sensation, you know? That's just something. And it doesn't have to, I don't have to freak out. It's temporary. And I tell people in there, it's temporary. In about 5 minutes, you're going to be back to normal. And they're like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not, I'm not cold anymore. I'm cold, but I'm not cold anymore. I changed my relationship with the cold. I know what the sensation is.
Time I was at a dental event in Arizona, I think it was, and they had a very nice spa at this resort, and so I did the spa thing, and they had a cold plunge. Spas have that sometimes.
Mhm.
So, and it was right next to, of course, the hot tub. Right. So it's like right next door. So you got to be careful which one you step in. But anyway, so I did the cold plunge and, I lowered myself in. And it's so true that your nervous system just takes over, like fight or flight mode takes over. Like, what are you doing? This is freezing. There's no point in being here. What are you doing? And I did have to try really hard to tap into my yogic breathing and just calm myself down and try to bring myself to another place just because I wanted to complete the challenge of it. Now, I don't think I lasted more than a minute because, even 10 seconds in that feels like an eternity. But if
Right.
I would have known that a minute was the goal, that would have been easier to accomplish, I think. But, once you can get past that state, but it was really profound for me how I had to basically coach my own mind into calming down and understanding that, like you said, this is temporary. We're totally fine. We're not in danger. You can do this. And then, of course, got myself out of the pool. But it is interesting, if we're talking about how this method can get us to go to these deeper places in our mind. It was very interesting to notice that even just after 10, 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, I see it as expanding. So, we're okay with this small little window of what we're used to experiencing. And then if we kind of dose ourselves with these peak experience, so they're hermetic stressors. It's like exercise or anything else. You don't want to sit in an ice bath for an extremely long time. After a while, it's going to start causing you harm. But doing these spikes and pulling your nervous system into this state and pulling your body into this state, it expands yourself. It expands what you're okay with and what your nervous system can grapple with on a regular daily basis. So then when stressors come upon you, it's like, can I not let that affect me? Can I let that slow me down? So everything becomes more elastic. Your whole body is rubbing up against something that's teaching it how to cope. And in the same way, that 1 minute was super hard. Usually in a workshop, we want people to stay for 2 minutes. Um, my first experience was I just went straight to Poland just to go right to the source. And your body is so adaptable that you could adapt to the really extreme version of it too. I remember 3 or 4 days in, we're climbing a mountain in our shorts. And I'm like, I always saw it as like, oh, there's going to be this slow acclimatization. But put in a survival situation, your body will always rise to the occasion. And that's one of those like things that you can communicate verbally or, through the thinking mind, but having the experience of seeing what it feels like for your body to really rise to an occasion and to really pull out from its energy reserves is a powerful experience. And I think that's what switches something in people's brains to really let them realize like, oh, I'm a lot bigger than I am. Like, and I know that not because someone told me, but because I felt it and I was
Right.
there. A felt experience is way more powerful than just the intellectual version of it. And in this day and age, I feel like we all, because of the information superhighway and all that, we're like we want to have the understanding. I want to read the cliff notes or I want to read the article or whatever, and then I'll be on with my day. I tell people about breath work and they're like, yeah, yeah, I've heard about it. I've read about it. I'm like, but have you done it? It's different. And
Right.
then you begin to understand that to really learn, we have to go to the places, we have to experience the things, we have to have our full body in it, not just intellectual understanding of something.
So you mentioned that you have an app that offers some of these techniques. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about that. But I also know that you offer workshops. So tell us about that as well. And then maybe you can speak to the idea that, on the East Coast, but maybe someone living on the West Coast who can't get to your workshop. What should they be looking for if they want to explore this felt experience?
Okay, so for those who don't live in the area, an easy way to find an instructor near you is just go on the Wim Hof method page and they have like I live here and they'll show you all the workshops closest to you. And most Wim Hof instructors that I met are pretty great and they're gonna communicate the process really well. I mean, there's a lot of instructors, but it's very close knit, I feel like. All the Wim Hof instructors have something interesting to offer. I mixed it up with a lot of them, and they're all really great. And there's a bunch in California. There's like a bunch in California, a bunch in Colorado, a bunch in like New York, and then like maybe less in between. But you're in California, so there's probably a ton. In terms of what we do, so we do a lot of weekend workshops. Then our big events are our retreats. So one of the main ones that we've been doing for about 6 years now is we do a retreat up in Maine where we put everyone in, it's very close to nature because everyone stays in yurts. You got to heat up the yurt with a wood burning fire. We have a big sauna there. We have a hot yoga room there. But then we're dipping in nature. And there's something more special about doing it in nature in the middle of winter. I always say like doing this method in nature, in the elements, in the middle of winter, like unlocks a whole season for us. Because we like most of the time in the winter, we all just bundle up and go inside and we don't get to experience the natural beauty that exists out there. So doing this, I now look forward to winters because I'm like, it's playtime.
Yeah.
The water is going to be cold. So we do one in Maine in December and we do one in Iceland in March, which is like the deep dive if you want to be really, really hardcore and do a hike in the shorts and do like we'll do a sweat lodge there as well and all kinds of wild stuff. We walk on coals and
Wow.
things like that. So and do a bunch of vinyasa yoga and kundalini yoga. So we do different workshops, different breathwork events. We get really creative and have a lot of fun. We've built a pretty nice community here in Philadelphia. It's an easy way to have all these different types of breathing methods all in one place. You can download our app. We'd love that. It's great. We think we did a good job with it. But if you can find so many breathing recordings on YouTube, there's a ton of different apps out there. But if you just YouTube search Wim Hof method breathing 15 minutes, for example, or 3 rounds, or 5 rounds, or 8 rounds, there's going to be a million options. So it's out there, just finding out how to figure it out. But I would tell, your your listeners to find a workshop first. Find someone to just lead you through the first time, the very first one. And it's like usually it's about like $150 or something like that. And people are like, ah, that's a little pricey. But I'm like, I've seen this method change so many people's life. $150 isn't anything. And then from there, it's such a simple method that you won't need to spend any more money again after that. But getting that foundational understanding and getting it communicated to you and taught to you for what it actually is, as opposed to what you see on the internet is just body hacking and making yourself stronger and making yourself immune. That's such a small part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great advice. Originally, when you and I spoke about doing this podcast episode, we had tossed around the idea that we would practice this so that I can show the audience what it looked like, and we can talk about what it felt like. But I've changed my mind. I don't want to do that because I don't want people passing out doing this. Right. Like, I think it's a really good idea for them to go have a proper workshop. And, if they are interested in this after our discussion, like you said, it's easy to find a workshop. Maybe for my listeners, in between the coasts, it might be a little bit more challenging, but maybe it's something when they go on vacation and, if they go to a resort or a state or a bigger city that has more Wim Hof offering, they now know what to look for and what to ask for, and they can try it out, because I want them to know that this is a thing, that this is an option for just a different way to access deeper parts of themselves through their breath, through the cold. Because as I mentioned earlier, as a yogi, a lot of my breathing techniques that I offer to my audience are for stress management, to slip out of the sympathetic response into the parasympathetic response. But there is a whole slew of other breathing techniques that do the opposite. They activate the sympathetic response for a reason, which you've beautifully laid out today. So thank you so much for coming onto the show today and for sharing your expertise with the audience. If anyone is interested in following Peter on Instagram at Ignite Sadhana, I will spell it out and put it in the show notes for you so you can check out his offering, his workshops and the app. But otherwise, if you have any questions or comments about this episodes, we'd love to connect with you. You social media or email in the show notes. Peter, thank you so much again. Be well, friends.
Thanks so much for having me.